Welcome to the Knowledge Sacks Podcast, a podcast built on listener submissions, current events, and politics sprinkled with insightful historical context for curious leftist comrades. We're learning and we want to learn with you. We're planting seeds because we only reap what we sow. Let's sow knowledge, positivity, and accountability and watch our garden grow. And watch our garden grow together. To submit your local stories, provide historical context, elaborate on a subject, or make corrections to a previously reported story, shoot us an email at knowledgesacks01@gmail.com. You can find our weekly podcast on SoundCloud, Facebook, Twitter, Podbean, Libsyn, and YouTube. All relevant links can be found wherever the description box may be located on whatever platform this podcast has been found. So, I want to talk about my absence and why I haven't released a podcast in over a month and why I've been all over the place in social media and what's going on in my life. In brief, I'm getting divorced. I'm getting divorced because I was unhappy in my marriage to my now going to be ex-husband. I'm currently separated. The divorce hasn't been finalized, but our marriage and our relationship and the lack of romantic, passionate love within our relationship, our different views on sexuality, our different views on monogamy, our different views on society, our different views on how to handle racism and white supremacy, our views on politics. What originally brought my ex together, what brought us together, that foundation no longer exists because I have changed so much as a person that the person that my ex-husband originally married is not the person I am today. And we grew apart and we didn't grow together in the way that I wanted him to grow. I cannot make my partner grow. I cannot make my significant other view the world the way I see it. I cannot force people to think the way I think and believe what I believe. I can be convincing, and I have convinced him, and I have changed his mind about a lot of things. I have changed his politics in a radical way, but it's personally never going to be enough for me because I've just realized how our marriage was arranged because of white supremacy, because of patriarchy, because of who I am as a person and where I come from and where my people come from, Puerto Rico, and our culture. And it's so complicated and so simple at the same time. And I think I explained it as best as I could. I am starting a blog, and it's called The Catholic Communist, and I'm planning on doing daily blog entries because officially my family has completely abandoned me. I have had family members, I'll keep them anonymous, reach out to my ex-husband and tell him that he has their support 100%. And one of those people is my own mother. And my ex-husband, my soon-to-be ex-husband, is so confused about it because he just doesn't understand. He doesn't understand why they're not supporting their own daughter. It actually makes him very angry that they have reacted to our marriage dissolving amicably in an immature fashion. And I haven't been the most mature towards my family in regards to this situation, but a lot of the anger and a lot of the frustration I feel is warranted and valid. And my family refuses to be held accountable for what they are doing and what they have done. And they like to believe, a lot of people in America like to believe that even though something happened years ago, decades ago, hundreds of years ago, centuries ago, that you can just pull yourself up by the bootstraps and wipe your tears away and toughen up because that's the way the world is. Well, it doesn't have to be. I can hold people accountable for what they've done, regardless if they're ever going to apologize, or if they're ever going to be in my life the way I need them to be. My parents have chosen to conduct themselves in a manner that is absolutely disgusting, and they don't want to take responsibility for what they've done. I take responsibility for the choices that I have made. I take responsibility for the things that I have done. But in regards to that, a lot of the things that my parents will cite as horrible, terrible things that I have done, I did when I was under the age of 20. I'm 26. I got married at 21 because I needed to survive. And I couldn't do it, or I thought I couldn't do it on my own. I never learned how to drive, which is something your parents have to teach you how to do. In North Carolina, where I grew up, I did have driver's ed classes, as part of the school curriculum, but it was after school when I would normally work, and my paycheck would actually pay the entire household's phone bill, even though my mom would lie to me and tell me that I was only paying my phone bill. I actually caught her in her lie because I checked the phone bill statement because I wanted to know exactly what I was paying. And that it resulted in a fight. She was angry that I couldn't trust her. Well, obviously I can't trust her. I've grown up not being able to trust my own parents. I've grown up surviving and scrapping for what I can. But the whole point of bringing up the phone bill was I worked at a grocery store in high school, and you weren't allowed to miss any days, not one day, of driver's ed at the time I was taking driver's ed. I don't know if the rules have changed. I don't know if the rules changed when my sister took driver's ed. I don't know what they were then, but I do know when I took driver's ed, you weren't allowed to miss one day of driver's ed, or you would automatically fail the course. I took driver's ed 3 times. I've had my permit multiple times. I used to drive illegally as a teenager because I have been on my own for a long time. I have been doing things on my own for a long time without a lot of financial help, without a lot of guidance. I've been kind of milling around and doing what I can any way that I can. When I decided to get divorced from my husband, it coincided around the time that my cousin was leaving to go back to Puerto Rico. So not only have I said goodbye to my cousin and sent him to an island that is in complete anarchy and chaos, not only have I forged a friendship with him that will last a lifetime, but I have lost my family to this divorce. I have lost my financial stability to this divorce. And it was my choice because I much prefer my own freedom and my own space than being married to someone in which we were both completely codependent on each other and we were never going to satisfy each other's needs because we had changed so much as people and we drifted apart because of it. I don't understand why that's so difficult for my loved ones and other people around me, my friends, to understand. Sometimes things just don't work out, and the mature thing to do, while my son is young and won't be emotionally, mentally scarred by a huge custody battle like my parents had with their multiple children, I don't even want to ever really get married again. Marriage is not for me. And so in this episode, in observance of what I've been going through, I'm going to talk about toxic relationships and mental health. And of course, I'm going to tie it back into Puerto Rico. And I have episode 8 planned. It's going to be about cryptocurrency and some very interesting information I found out by some of these players that are in Puerto Rico. I do want to add a couple more things. So I work full-time at a gas station. And like I said, I'm going to document what I'm going through, how, what's going on in my life, because I really would rather build an online community regardless if people think I'm attention seeking or I have mental health issues. I do have mental health issues. I have PTSD. I have diagnosed PTSD. And that's something I live with. And regardless if other people want to acknowledge that is what I have or what I am going through, then that's a whole nother subject. But I will tell you and I will explain to you as rationally as I possibly can with the words that I currently have now what I'm going through. Like, I know I'm silly and I know I'm cafre and I know I'll say whatever I say, whatever's on my mind, and I'll be loud and silly and blah, blah. But that's who I am. I'm never going to change who I am to fit some mold that someone else wants me to live in, to be that whatever, because that's inauthentic to myself. I don't want to be the white supremacist cookie cutter mold, picturesque, picket white fence family in the suburbs as a settler on land that's stolen, that never belonged to me, while more and more Puerto Ricans currently are leaving in huge mass exoduses of the island as settlers move onto our land back home. And then even then, in a sense, I'm a settler there because the Taino Indians still exist, still are trying to fight for their land rights. It always feels like an uphill battle because you're watching your amistades, you're watching your allies, you're watching people that you want to lift up that are marginalized be crapped on, and you're doing the most that you personally can do. I don't have enough money to go to Puerto Rico. I don't have enough money to donate anymore. I'm scraping by. I'm making ends meet. I have to budget like a MFer like no other. I have to budget like no other. Like I have never, that's bullcrap. I've budgeted like this before, but it's been a long time where my resources have been so stretched, so thin, that I have to be incredibly careful about how I spend money and where I spend money and when I spend money. Like, I have to get money orders, right, to pay my rent. And that's a $3 fee I have to account for anytime I use the ATM at the gas station I work at. But it's better than riding a couple of buses to reach an ATM where I won't have the fees, right? Because that's hours and hours in a day that I just wasted when I could just walk and pay the convenience fee of $3 so I can use that ATM. It's unsettling to me how quickly you don't matter to other human beings if you don't fit a particular mold or a particular, like, if you don't look a certain way, if you don't act a certain way, if you don't obey societal norms, you are ostracized and looked down upon. I mean, I feel like I'm wearing a scarlet letter. But what's funny, too, is, like, single dudes, or just dudes in general, like, straight cishet dudes, are hitting me up like never before. So, it's like, well, I'm getting divorced, and now I'm getting a lot of male attention, and to be honest, it makes me incredibly uncomfortable, but at the same time, it's flattering. So it's like, it's scary, but it's like, oh, thanks for the compliment. Just don't stalk me, please. I live in fear because it's like, well, if some of these people find out I'm queer and I like women, they'll use that, they'll fetishize that, and they'll, I don't know, like they'll look down upon me like almost everybody does. And what hurts the most is knowing that people that used to respect me don't and never will respect me ever again because I decided to not be in an unhappy relationship. I thought people would be happy for me. I thought people would understand, especially my own mother, but in this case, I'm on my own. Like I said, I'm starting this blog. Hopefully, maybe, like there's a group of us in the DSA Boricua Diaspora Caucus. By the way, episode 7 was supposed to be the second part of that conversation between me and Leroy and my cousin. We're all members of the DSA Boricua Socialist Diaspora Caucus. But the file, when I downloaded it to my new laptop, got corrupted, yada yada. So I have to fix it. I have to figure out how I'm going to repair that second half of that interview so you guys can kind of hear what the DSA Boricua Socialist Diaspora Caucus represents and who we are and what we want to do. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is the file got corrupted and I have to fix it, and I believe I can fix it, and if not, well, then I have this episode 8, which I'm planning on doing about cryptocurrency. I'm still doing some more research on that. And then I will release the rest of that interview with me, Leroy, and my cousin Gustavo. But like, people are doing what they can to survive, and that's all people can do. Like, you can't expect them to do any more or any less. Also, we do have some projects that we're working on for the DSA Diaspora Caucus. We are working on a newsletter. We're calling it El Grito Diasporico. And I'm writing an article, and 2 other comrades, I believe, of mine are writing an article. And we're writing an introductory statement and a mission statement within this newsletter, the first publication of it, about what we are, who we are, what we represent. And we want to work on a zine, and our dream in the future would be that this zine is, that this zine will be a representation of art and culture and who we are as a people. And every zine and every newsletter is going to have a theme. And this first newsletter we're trying to publish at the end of this month. This first newsletter is going to be privatization. So there's a lot of things that we're currently working on. Direct action is a lot harder because people are leaving the island like never before. And speaking of which, so before we get into the mental health parts of this episode and taking care of ourselves and, you know, cutting out toxic relationships and why we should cut out toxic relationships from our lives and our families. This article just came out in the Washington Post on March 6, 2018. Exodus from Puerto Rico grows as island struggles to rebound from Hurricane Maria. What the title of this article should really be is Exodus from Puerto Rico grows as purposeful ethnic cleansing occurs on the island by rich elites who want to build a playground made out of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and continue to reap the benefits of the impending mortgage crisis that's going to happen. Because what America would want to live without power for 8 months? There hasn't been power to most parts of the island since September 20th, and there's places that have had no power since Hurricane Irma. How is it that this Hurricane Irma knocked out all the power to the whole entire island, even though Irma that brushed most parts of the island? Now, some parts were devastated, or some parts were destroyed by Hurricane Irma, but not like Hurricane Maria. Maria just went through and messed with like even Viejo San Juan, like the port cities, the capital of Puerto Rico. Do you think that people who live on the mainland the continental U.S., you think that they would go through what Puerto Ricans have been going through? And you don't think that this is going to cause trauma and we're going to have more issues with generational trauma in our culture, in our people, do people not care? Do we not matter to anybody? Like, do Puerto Ricans not matter? Well, the reality is when you're poor, your life doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how hard you work. Doesn't matter how much money you save. If you don't have the plata to start your own business, if you don't have the plata to get a college degree, if you don't have those 1,000 steps that you need to get ahead, and you're not middle class, and you were born lower middle class, and you were born working poor, and you were born working class, you were born those classes, you're not getting out unless you start kissing lots of butt from a young age and assimilating into American culture. With all that being said, let's go to the article from the Washington Post. San Juan, Puerto Rico. There have been 3 muses in Ramoncito Eladino Rodriguez's life: love, lament, and La Isla, Puerto Rico. The founder of one of the oldest musical acts here, Rodriguez croons boleros and lyrical anthems that at times quicken the heart, and at others create a daydreamy lull. Many of them are homages to his motherland, love songs to this Caribbean island. It was a place he never wanted to leave, but leave he did. Rodriguez reluctantly abandoned Puerto Rico after several feet of floodwater spilled into his home during Hurricane Maria in September, destroying his instruments, albums, and handwritten compositions. The 17-year-old joined hundreds of thousands of other islanders who boarded flights in the past 5 months, creating a growing diaspora that, as time passes, is increasingly unlikely to return. Rodriguez and his wife, like so many others, picked Florida, and their stateside sojourn was supposed to be temporary. They didn't expect stability back home to be elusive for so long. You know, right now in Puerto Rico, they don't even know how many murders. They don't even know how many rapes. They don't really know how many people died as a result of the hurricanes. They don't really know how many people have just disappeared, how many people have gone missing because of the hurricanes. There are children killing their loved ones. There are 17-year-olds threatening World War III type threats and annexing Florida and white supremacy Nazi type ideas. Killing all the old people for resources. Like, that was a controversy a couple weeks back. What's happening back home on the island in Puerto Rico that is never, hardly ever on the mainland news networks? It's disgusting what America has done and continues to allow to happen on the island. We just want our independence. We just want people to leave us alone so we can rebuild. Do you know why Puerto Rico is so messed up? Because all the tax laws that apply on the mainland don't apply there because of the Jones Act that requires, the Jones Act and tariffs that are imposed upon Puerto Ricans, because we're not American citizens in the sense of what mainlanders experience. We don't get to vote in elections. We don't vote in elections. We do not vote in United States general election. Never. We vote for our governor, who has no political say on what happens on the island because of what Obama passed, Promesa. What the U.S. government is telling you, what these propaganda news networks are telling you, even the Washington Post, you gotta watch out for, you gotta read this carefully. People don't think about people's humanity anymore. People only see dollar signs. What can I get from you? How can I exploit you to get what I need for myself? That's what capitalism does. It destroys what humanity other people have in favor of these strange institutions like the nuclear family and religion. Like anything that will brainwash you and indoctrinate you and keep you shushed and feel like in a role of fealty where you have to look up into a godlike figure. Like patriotism is a religion in the United States of America, Kaka. Like, don't you think for a second that the fanaticism around the American flag isn't like the fanaticism of Puerto Rican Catholics on the island? People would rather keep their guns that they're untrained to use in fear that black and brown people are going to rise up and start fighting back for their land rights and for the atrocities that have occurred towards their people and continues to occur to this day. People are afraid of teachers in West Virginia protesting for the bare minimum when they're mostly white female liberals, white feminists, that white feminism, white liberal idea. And they're just asking, I mean, what they're doing is awesome. And they're going against the grain and they're doing what they gotta do. They're hustling, they're grinding. They gotta do what they gotta do. They're feeding the kids. That's what they're doing in West Virginia. But at the end of the day, these people are fighting for the bare minimum. How is it in the state I live in, Kentucky, there's a pension crisis that there are people here, experts, quote unquote experts, financial experts, that are looking to Puerto Rico to see what they're doing. Because guess what? Kentucky's also a commonwealth. So now, going back to the mass exodus in Puerto Rico. Going back to Rodriguez, his story. I'm still here, Rodriguez said with a sigh, from his niece's house in Homestead, Florida, in mid-February. If the past decade of Puerto Rican history is any indication, his stay could be permanent. Destiny will decide what happens next. I'm sorry, Rodriguez, but it's time we take destiny within our own hands. And I know that you're 76 years old, but homie, we got you. The young people in the diaspora need to start waking up, and they need to start doing their research, and they need to start reading some books, and they need to start doing their homework, and they need to start doing what we gotta do to help our people back home. I don't know what that looks like for me. I don't really know I'm just trying to do what I gotta do. And I finally just got moved into my apartment, so now I can start recording the podcast, and I got a lot of episodes to make up. But you don't think for a second that I'm gonna give up. Don't think for a second I'm going to let my voice die out like a flame in the wind on a cold, chilly, Sunday, snowy night as a breeze whistles over the candle that is my life. Don't you think that just because I flicker, I'm going to fade out with that wind, with that cold Kentucky wind. Don't think for a second that I'm going to fade away. Just because I'm human, and I gotta take breaks from doing this so I can focus on myself for a little bit, emotionally and mentally, since my whole family has abandoned me. Don't you think for a second that I'm going to abandon you. And don't you think for a second that I'm going to stop doing what I'm doing and stop doing what I love because of things that have happened to me personally in my life. I have a big mouth, and I'll probably die because of it. But I'm never going to stop. I'm never going to stop fighting for what's right, and what's right is independence of Puerto Rico. And what's right is that Rodriguez can go back home and have his things replaced so he can continue playing his music and writing lyrics and playing bolero. Respect your elders. Look, I got mad respect for my elders, but there are boundaries, right? If you're going to be a machista, I'm not going to tolerate you. I don't care how old you are. I do not get paid enough. You cannot pay me enough to tolerate your BS if you're going to be machista towards me. I don't have time. I really don't. So going back to the article. Even before Maria strafed the region, a record number of Puerto Ricans were realizing that the declining island might be where their heart is, but cannot be where their feet stay. Nearly 500,000 people left Puerto Rico for the mainland the past decade, according to the Pew Research Center, pushing the stateside Puerto Rican population past the number living on the island last year, an estimated 3.3 million. The government of Puerto Rico's guess is that by the end of 2018, 200,000 more residents will have left the U.S. territory for good, moving to places such as Florida, Nueva York, Texas, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New England. It would mean another drop of more than 5% in the island's population. You already know, all these other episodes that I have recorded, you already know I've been talking about the mass migration, the forced ethnic cleansing of our country. We do not have self-determination in Puerto Rico. We don't have any rights. Everything is predetermined for us. And another thing that's not being discussed enough is the fact that corporations are laying off people on the island left and right, and have been since 2006, when the manufacturers for the pharmaceutical companies left and right, laying off all these people. And at one point after Hurricane Maria, that the unemployment rate was 80% on the island. This is no joke. This is serious. I don't know how I'm going to say this. I don't know how to get people to take Puerto Rico and what people are going through seriously. I don't know how sobering I have to be. I don't know how angry I have to sound. I don't know how upset I need to be. I don't know how sad I need to cry so loud. I need to make a show of myself. I need to appear as a fool. Do I? Do I need to do those things? Do I need to have a tantrum for people to see the pain and suffering that I feel? Or do I just have a lack of affect like I do right now because I'm so numb to everything that's happening on the island, that a piece of me refuses to give up? But I feel so downtrodden because I feel like I can never get ahead of the dismal news coming from the island. Experts say the storm and its widespread devastation undoubtedly have sped up the pace of migration, as residents have dealt with extended power outages, communication lapses, infrastructure failures, and in some cases, isolation. What already was the largest exodus in the island's history now includes people fleeing in droves simply to achieve some sense of normalcy, leaving their culture, leaving their families, leaving everything that they actually know behind. It sounds like, you know what? I'm going to say it. Puerto Ricans are leaving a war zone. Like, there are more people occupying the space of Puerto Rico that don't belong there to impose capitalism on us, on the Puerto Rican people. And the Puerto Rican people are tired, and they're scared. And they lack normalcy. They don't even have power. Sometimes they had a forced ration of running water on I believe it was the northeast side of the island. Correct me if I'm wrong. But the point is, the Puerto Rican people, that some of them haven't had running water. September 20th, 2017. Right now it's March 7th. 6 months. It's been 6 months since people haven't had power. Some people haven't had running water. It's been half a freaking year. How desperate are people? If you don't have enough money, if you don't have a job, if they're laying everybody off, if they're closing down Walmarts because of this hurricane, if they're closing down, this is the time where we can pick up the pieces of our own island. If the U.S. government would just leave us alone and give us our independence. We don't want statehood. Stupid people like Ricardo Rosello and, the other one, Jennifer, whatever her face is, all these stupid, ignorant, dumb, these DA mayors, they're so dumb. They are so dumb. Dumb, 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 dumb. They want statehood for Puerto Rico, and then currently in Baltimore, there's still, again, another crisis where there are children who are missing out from school because they don't have central heating in the classrooms. They don't have heat in classrooms. They have kids wearing full outdoor gear inside. Alabama is one of the poorest places in the whole freaking world. People in this country do not have health care. More and more people are becoming homeless and dying out in the streets. There's a huge giant opioid crisis that's still affecting the northeast of the United States. It hasn't gotten better. It's gotten worse. There's people dying. There's an increase of STIs all over this country. There's a war again. It's a class war. Puerto Ricans are leaving the island because it's a class war. And in order to survive, they think that going to the gilded streets of Florida, where the fountain of youth is, the Spanish conquistadores thought originally there was the fountain of youth, to pick up the pieces of their life, only to find out that people live in complete abject poverty here too. But the difference is, at least it's better than Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico is a freaking third world country. My cousin and I talk almost every single night. I remember he went through his first blackout, the 4th day he was there. This is it, guys. This is what it's like to be Puerto Rican in the United States. Literally no one could give 2 craps about you or your existence. The Washington Post continues. Just this week, a power outage put nearly 900,000 residents in and around the capital city of San Juan in the dark, and without water again. Tens of thousands in Puerto Rico have had no electricity since the hurricane struck 5 months ago. And the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers estimates that 1 in 10 customers still won't have it as of the end of March. The island's bankrupt public utility has struggled to restore power amid contracting scandals. Whitefish Energy, which I have 3 episodes on, and I'm still going to continue to add. I still have to do an episode on Scott Pruitt. I still have to do another episode on Rex Tillerson, because now he's going to Africa and he's messing around in Ethiopia. Dude, these colonizers are no joke. They really just want to steal resources from poor black and brown. They want to steal resources specifically from poor black and brown people. Because with white supremacy, you can demonize and you can make people, you can take people's humanity away from them through media. I mean, that is what white supremacy is built on. It's built on representation and imagery, because humans are visual creatures. I mean, we're surrounded and saturated in propaganda. An advertisement within itself is a little sheet of propaganda. It's a little visual of, let me sell you this product, and we're going to do certain things, and we're going to use certain music, and we're going to use certain models, and we're going to use certain visuals, certain subliminal messaging to get you to buy this product and want this product more and more. And those ideas and those ideals are upheld with those visuals and with those images. And a lot of those ideals include white supremacist type of ideas. We're going to take the lighter skin version of, like me, like I'm white passing. I am white passing. People are more inclined to listen to me as a white passing individual, which is a form of white privilege, which is a form of white privilege, than to darker skinned Puerto Ricans. Because at the end of the day, when you're Puerto Rican, it's a nationality. It's not a color. It's right. It's not a race. But it's an identity that, as a white Latinx person, I cling to because it's all I've ever really known. No one showed me how to do this or be that. I've always been a struggling Puerto Rican person. Like, I've always been someone struggling to fight for my identity. Because so many people from so many different places have tried to take that away from me. Or it feels like they're trying to take it away from me. Or they're trying to redefine who I should be and who I am not. When I know who I am and I'm trying to tell you who I am, but people don't want to listen. People want to think that you don't know who you are and what your role is. And at the same time, it's like, yeah, I'm trying to figure that out for myself. But for now, this is what there's constructive criticism. Like, I get it. Like, if you need to reach out to me and tell me that I'm saying something wrong or my ideas are kind of messed up, I'll listen to you. That's constructive criticism. But if you're being completely ridiculous and you're not understanding where I'm coming from and you are failing on purpose to not understand what I'm saying about myself, that's a reflection of you and your projections and your perceptions of who I am and what you think I think you are or who you are. That's miscommunication, and we have a lot of that in these leftist communities where some people think that they're attacking other people and they're really not, and the reality is we're all fighting for the same things, I think. And then it goes back to, just because you're a leftist doesn't mean you don't have crappy ideas and that you're a perfect person. You can have good politics, but you can still be a white supremacist. Well, with all that being said, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers estimates that 1 in 10 customers still won't have it as of the end of March. The island's bankrupt public utility has struggled to restore power, and contracting scandals, material shortages, and intermittent blackouts. And the biggest restoration contractor, Fleur Corp, confirmed that it is pulling out of Puerto Rico in the next several weeks after reaching the funding limit of its $746 million contract. By the way, instead of replacing the failing infrastructure, the electricity infrastructure, the substations, all of that in Puerto Rico, like I've repeatedly said, like there was an episode where I talked about the failing infrastructure in the whole of the United States, where we have an average of D- for infrastructure in general in the United States, including its territories. Instead of replacing it with solar panels, because, I don't know, it's a Caribbean island and it's right, like, around the equator, and it's, like, right there where the sun hits it, and it's 90 degrees, 70 degrees all year round, and there's sun every freaking day just beaming down on the island, instead of using solar energy. And let me tell you, Tesla, he's gonna have an episode too. Trust me, because he's one of these weirdo Bitcoin people too. He's got friends that do this weird cryptocurrency crap that want to, these people are all connected. If you're a billionaire, you are an insensitive, disconnected POS. Like, you are not a good person. If you are hoarding billions of dollars and you're not giving it back to your workers, and you're not giving completely free aid, and you're not completely replacing the infrastructure in Puerto Rico right now, for solar panels, for solar power as a form of reparations for the atrocities that the U.S. government has done, and you just do direct action and do anarchy on your own, You are a completely horrible, disgusting, despicable human being, and I will call you out for it. It doesn't matter. That's why when people are like, oh, white liberals, ugh, that's what we mean. There are people who, like, evangelized for these scientists, and especially in regards to progressives and atheists, especially atheist progressives. Like, do you guys understand, like, what's actually going on, the scope of the issues on the island of Puerto Rico and how deep it goes? It goes centuries deep. People want to oversimplify and at the same time overcomplicate simple concepts because they think that they're better than other people. Like, your college degree isn't crap. Your college degree is pretty much useless. Information is constantly. This is an information-driven age. There's new information out there all of the time, and you have to sift through it, and you have to make sure it's reliable and accurate. And you do that by knowing how to vet your sources. And I don't have to read BS, and I don't have to subject myself to reading an interview about a Nazi. I have no sympathy for someone who relates to Hitler. It's simple. The Washington Post continues. The governor announced plans last month to privatize the electric utilities, sparking standoffs with unionized workers and arousing suspicions from residents. Some municipalities, such as San Sebastian, a town in the island's northwest corner, didn't wait and formed their own volunteer brigades to string up power lines and return electricity to thousands of residents. Nearly 58,000 homes here have roofs made of blue tarps while they await federal assistance. More than 437,000 residents, about 2 of every 5 who applied so far, have received money from the Federal Emergency Management Agency for home repairs. For many, the future feels ominous. Victor Dominguez set a June deadline for his island. If Puerto Rico doesn't get the lights back on and move the economy, the mortgage banker will take his family elsewhere. Quote, I am very attached to my island, and my preference is to stay here, but I have to think of what's best for my son, unquote, the 39-year-old said. Quote, I'm in a movement in which I have been very observant about what's happening and be flexible. Unquote. Immediately after the storm, Dominguez sent his family to the States for 2 weeks while he continued working and taking care of their home. When school in Florida announced that they would take in Puerto Rican students, he and his wife considered enrolling their 10-year-old. But as long as he had a job on the island, the family decided to work and wait it out. Many of his colleagues and neighbors did not. Quote, combined with the economic crisis, this was a perfect storm for the country to just empty. There's still a lot of people. But I hear about people who are leaving on a weekly basis. I've spoken to people who have this hope of coming back to Puerto Rico, but I've also heard from people who are happy to have permanent stability. Unquote. And I have to, like, I'm sorry, maybe I'm a little bit maniacal, but I think it's funny. There's no stability here, guys. There's no stability here. I could get fired at any moment. I live in a fire-at-will state in Kentucky. Like, they could just be like, oh, well, you're fired. I don't like you. I don't like the way you do this. So I'm gonna fire you. It's scary. Like, the United States it's horrible. This place is horrible. I hate it here. I don't even know where to go. This is what a totalitarian capitalist system is like. You know, the more Puerto Ricans I meet here on the mainland, and the more networking I'm doing in person, the more you hear the same things. Oh, in los Estados Unidos, you go to work, and you go home, and you go to work, and you go home, and you go to work, and you go home. Back home, you go visit your family, and you have dinner at different places, and people are so giving. And if you need money, people will give it to you. And people don't just take things from you, and people don't just, like, our culture it does have things that it needs to be fixed, absolutely, right? We have homophobia, transphobia, we have, ridiculously high murder rates, patriarchy is disgusting and rampant, machismo actively kills people. That's why we have colectiva feminista. So, I mean, there are people who have been fighting against these norms, these cultural norms in our society, in Puerto Rican culture. But with that being said, we are giving, we are loving, we are caring for the most part. And I feel like colonization and assimilation took that away from my family my immediate family that live on the mainland. It's about how I can get ahead. And who I can screw over and throw you under a bus because you don't deserve my love, because you don't fit this societal idea of this thing, this imagery I have in my mind of this white, blonde, beautiful, skinny, model type girl that I will never be. I will never be her. I'm not going to dye my hair blonde. I did that. I feel like anytime any person of color, any white passing, any person who's going through an identity crisis, the first thing they do is dye their hair blonde. So, I mean, I'm not going to be like what my parents, their idea of the white picket fence woman, whatever that suburban housewife looks like to them. I'm not going to be her. Because that's not me. That's not who I am. And it's not about being raised to be a certain way and that I'm a disappointment because I went off on the beaten path. It's because literally I am being who I am. And I'm not someone's property. And I'm not my parents' property. And I'm not a thing that you can dictate what I can and cannot do. I'm a 26-year-old woman. And it's about damn time I start doing things for myself. And I don't have codependent relationships with people. That I have what is it called? Interdependence, right? Like dependence on the community. Multiple people. Not just like one person day in and day out who I cannot emotionally support because they cannot emotionally support me. So anyway, Jose Luis Rodriguez, 53, spends his nights in a wind-damaged wooden home pressed against a steep hillside in Comerio, in central Puerto Rico. The mosquitoes are relentless, but the loneliness is what stings. He lives by himself in a barrio where most of the residents rely on government assistance, and half of the homes are now vacant because of the hurricane. The La Plata River that runs through the town swelled by more than 60 feet, inundating hundreds of homes, including that of Rodriguez's daughter, 24. Having lost everything, she joined her twin sister on the mainland, leaving behind their father, who is struggling. They are the only thing I have, Rodriguez said. If I could, I would be there. My daughter said she would come back, but she doesn't have a place to live. Capitalism will leave a 24-year-old homeless and a father without his daughters before lending a helping hand. Puerto Ricans have moved back and forth between the island and the mainland for more than a century. After they received U.S. citizenship in 1917, just in time to fight in World War I. The circular migration is a fundamental part of the Puerto Rican experience, immortalized in the island's art and music, because moving from the territory is as easy as moving between states. But is it really that easy? Like, these people who write this stuff are so privileged. Oh, it's so easy. Who's gonna pack my stuff for me? Who's gonna take care of my stuff? Where am I going? Am I gonna be homeless? Do I have an apartment secured in the next place I'm moving to? Do I have enough for the deposit? How much money am I gonna save? Like, these people are working poor. A majority of Puerto Ricans are poor. They live in poverty. These are not middle-class people, not even to American standards. Middle-class people on the island right now, like people like my cousin, don't have power regularly. So it's not as easy as moving between states because what poor person on the mainland can move between states easily? This is the most ridiculous thing I have ever read in my life. Anyway, I do agree though that moving back and forth is a part of the Puerto Rican experience. That's pretty accurate. The difference between the past decade's migration and that of previous generations is the character, size, and speed with which it threatens to change Puerto Rico's economic and social future. Migrants are looking for the jobs they can't find on the island. Jobs and stability. Migrants are looking for the things they can't find on the island. Jobs and stability, which there are none here on the mainland. There are and they're not. You want a low-wage position? Here you go. You want affordable housing? Good luck, because that doesn't exist on the mainland. Puerto Rico's teens and young adults don't know what kinds of opportunities will be available to them as the economic depression deepens, and this is back home on the island. Hector Camacho, 24, has tried to secure a job as a high school literature teacher for more than a year since graduating from the University of Puerto Rico. He now sends resumes to places such as Wyoming and Washington, D.C., hoping for an answer. Will I have a roof tomorrow? That's a worry I have, said Camacho. Me too, man. Me too. That's something I worry about month to month. Camacho, who is waiting tables here at a newly opened restaurant and arcade, I also have loans to pay. It's been pretty tough here. It's the same crap here, man. Camacho, it's the same here. Camacho and his friend Christopher Rosario, who left the island a year ago and joined the U.S. Army, which is something that happens all of the time, because when you're poor, what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? Oh, I'm going to join the U.S. Army because then at least I get square meals and I get to travel the world on someone else's dime. People are doing what they need to do to survive. I don't understand what's so complicated about understanding this. When you are poor, you cannot go to college. You do not have that luxury. You do what you can and you do what you do so you can survive. No es complicado. No es complicado. We're talking outside a laundromat near the university campus in San Juan last week when the power went out for the second time in 24 hours. Both grew up in Utuado, in the Central Mountains, and one of the hardest hit regions of the island, and what they saw there killed any lingering hope. You try to see the bright side, but it's too dim to see anything good, Camacho said. I'm done. Once I get a chance, I'm out. Puerto Rico's government fears Camacho is not alone. The administration of Governor Ricardo Rosselló, PNP of Puerto Rico, Republican. He's a Republican. He's a Trump supporter. Anytime you hear Ricardo Rosselló, he is a Trump supporter. That's all you need to think. He was clapping his hands in excitement, almost peeing on himself like an excited little dog when Trump was throwing paper towels into a crowd of probably other cheering PNP people who want statehood for Puerto Rico, but they don't even know English. Qué bochorno. So PNP of Puerto Rico published projections that put the island's population well below 3 million within a decade, a possible 10% decline in line with what researchers expect to see in war zones. Class war. This is class war. It is a war. It is a class war. The colonizers want the island, and they want to make it a playground, and they're going to do that with their cryptocurrency, and they're going to do that with their investment projects, and they want to make Puerto Rico white. That's what they want to do. They want to take the island away from us. They want a Puerto Rico without Puerto Ricans, just like Rosa Clemente has said over and over and over again. Or what happened during the Irish potato famine in the mid-1800s. What we are observing is a major depopulation event that is not extremely common in modern history, said Lyman Stone, an independent migration researcher and economist at the agricultural department who provided models to Puerto Rico. People kind of treated me like a crazy person when I put it out there. Demographers and economists say Stone's projections appear to be on the high end, but they caution that the Puerto Rican exodus will cut deeply. The Center of Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College in New York estimates that between 114,000 and 213,000 people will leave the island in 2018, with the vast majority headed for Florida. Most projections are based in part on the volatile airline passenger data tracking the number of people boarding flights leaving the island. 3 Florida airports reported 371,000 people traveling commercially from Puerto Rico since October. But so far, fewer than 40,000 people have visited the state's multi-agency service centers set up to assist migrants, and far fewer, about 4,500, have been issued state driver's licenses. The center's director, Edwin Melendez, is using school enrollment data from 6 states receiving Puerto Rican children to more accurately pinpoint migration. Since the hurricane, more than 22,000 students from the island have enrolled in stateside schools. More than half of those, 10,324 students, enrolled in school districts in Florida. Pennsylvania State University demographer Alexis R. Santos said it is difficult to measure the magnitude of that outflow without also considering people like Rodriguez, the musician who expect to return. It's all speculative, Santos said. We have to be really careful with the numbers. A more accurate migration headcount won't be available for months from the Census Bureau. And even then, it probably won't capture the entire picture of Puerto Rico's population fluctuations since the storm. Even before Maria, our ability to measure net migration in Puerto Rico wasn't very good, said Mario Marazzi, director of Puerto Rico Institute of Statistics, an independent agency. Economic predictions depend on good population statistics, said Puerto Rico economist Jose Joaquin Villamil. The island's economy had all but sputtered to a halt before the Category 5 hurricane hit, and there already was severe turmoil and job losses. The central government had tried to borrow its way out of strife to the point of bankruptcy. Bondholders demanded payment, and Congress appointed a fiscal oversight board in 2016 that imposed austerity measures. The Obama administration, friendly reminder, nearly half of the island's population lives in poverty, and household income is about $18,000 a year, like I've been saying this whole time. Less than half that of Mississippi, the country's poorest state. The scarcity of jobs along with low wages and a rising cost of living has caused young working-age Puerto Ricans to head for the mainland. Villamil said he estimates that nearly half of migrants are younger than 24. Falling birth rates led to a deeper population decline, and Puerto Rico has been left with a rapidly aging populace. Genesis Munoz, 19, a student at the University of Puerto Rico, wants to believe she can finish her bachelor's degree in art and painting, but money has gotten tighter since the storm. She doesn't eat well. Her family home in Humacao was severely damaged, and attending classes 40 miles away is just becoming too expensive. Everything is going badly, Munoz said. It bothers me that there are people who live in their bubble of privilege saying everything is okay. It's not. And I can't judge those who leave because in the long term, I know that I will also have to leave for my career. Population decline is one of the several factors Rosello's administration weighs in a fiscal plan that was revised this month, detailing how the government views its economic future and how it will find a way out of the red. Critics have said that the plan depends heavily on billions in hoped-for federal spending. With a less productive population, you are heading towards serious problems, Villamil said. Despite the outlook, some Puerto Ricans who left immediately after the hurricanes have returned to their homes and businesses trying to salvage the lives that they had there. Carla Lopez was almost certain she would have to relocate her pop-up retail incubator, Santurce Pop, to Central Florida in the days after the hurricane. She and her husband own a building in San Juan that provides affordable space to local entrepreneurs to build their small businesses, most of which specialize in locally sourced products and services. Lopez 33 took her 2 young kids to Orlando and began making arrangements with the local Chamber of Commerce to move her business there. But while she was shopping at a farmer's market, she realized her heart was still in Puerto Rico. What am I doing here? She said. I felt bad being there, knowing what was happening back home. She and her husband decided to return to San Juan and give the business 6 months to see if they could rebound. Although they lost about half of their clients, the couple reasoned that there was an opportunity to find new customers because many entrepreneurs lost their storefronts or are unable to pay high rent. Since the storm, they have opened a second location in Metro San Juan. We have a social responsibility to provide this space, Lopez said. This is ours. This is our baby. And if we don't fight for it, who will? Eso es. That's it. That's all you need to know about the Puerto Rican people. That is it. This is our social responsibility to talk about these issues and to raise our people up. This is it. This is our jobs as the diaspora, is for us to not stop talking, not give up, we may feel like that fading candle in the wind, but we cannot let that wick go out. We gotta keep that flame on. We gotta fill that passion that we have for our culture. If not, we will lose it and we will become whitewashed and we will become Americans. That's a decision over which Rodriguez, a musician, agonized. But the thing is, Rodriguez is 76. I feel bad for him, man. He's elderly. I'm not trying to be ageist, but come on, man. It's hot in Puerto Rico. I have an aunt who ran out of insulin, and I gave my cousin $500 when he went back. It was my whole paycheck, basically. So he could get insulin for my aunt and, whatever else, a generator, whatever else he feels like he needed. I mean, people are suffering back home, man. He too chose to return to the island, arriving Thursday to his waterlogged home, carrying his blue binder of crinkled compositions. Among them is a new song he wrote during his time in Florida. It's called Puerto Rico Pa'lante, said the crooner, smiling beneath the brim of his Panama hat, explaining that the title means that the Commonwealth is moving forward. The island beckoned me back. And the island will always beckon you back. 'Cause that's a part of who we are. We go back and forth because that's how we know how to survive as Puerto Ricanos. Oh yeah, so remember how I was talking about Alabama? This is from Yahoo News. Alabama has the worst poverty in the developed world, UN officials say. A United Nations official investigating poverty in the United States was shocked at the level of environmental degradation in some areas of rural Alabama, saying he had never seen anything like it in the developed world. Quote, I think it's very uncommon in the first world. This is not a sight that one normally sees. I'd have to say that I haven't seen this, unquote. Philip Alston, the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, told Connor Sheets of AL.com earlier this week as they toured a community in Butler County where raw sewage flows from homes through exposed PVC pipes and into open trenches and pits. The tour through Alabama's rural communities is part of a 2-week investigation by the UN on poverty and human rights abuses in the United States. So far, UN investigators have visited cities and towns in California, Alabama, and will soon travel to Puerto Rico, Washington, D.C., and West Virginia. Of particular concern to Alston are specific poverty-related issues that have surfaced across the country in recent years, such as an outbreak of hookworm in Alabama in 2017, a disease typically found in nations with substandard sanitary conditions in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. The UN investigation aims to study the effects of systemic poverty in a prosperous nation like the United States. The United States is only prosperous for certain classes because, honey, this is class war, and a part of it is ethnic cleansing because the colonizers used the guise of the U.S. government, the elites, to make us all into feudal. This is a feudalist system. The settlers make the settlers provide the labor and the control for the elites over the poorest, most marginalized groups of people. And the people who defy the white man's white supremacist social roles, such as trans people, such as queer people, such as black and brown people, that there are cultures, just the fact that our cultures exist and they're not Euro-American centered, those beauty ideals, those whatever ideals that go contra the white supremacist system in the United States or just worldwide, because there's anti-blackness worldwide. There's white supremacy worldwide. Europeans are not this evolved socialist group of people because their socialism isn't real socialism either. The more you study what other countries are doing and what other countries have done, and the fact that the United States still has allies in the EU as we continue to drop bomb after bomb on Syrians, we are doing mass genocide of black and brown people worldwide. And the European Union supports us. The UN, and I'm reading this article and it's about the UN investigating poverty in the United States, and the UN doesn't do its job either. They support colonizers, they support settlers, they don't really care about the sovereignty of black and brown people either. But the whole point of me reading this is just to point out the fact that there are institutions, regardless of how racist and xenophobic they are, that are saying, hey, like, the white people in these countries are poor and they're living in subpar conditions. So can you imagine what the marginalized groups of people, including predominantly black and brown people, what they're going through and what undocumented people are going through, and mass deportations that are occurring daily right now across this country. Like, it's time to stop thinking in dichotomies. It's time to stop thinking in this is that and this is that and this. We have to rebuild our society because it is crumbling around us, and it is crumbling because it cannot sustain itself. Because capitalism cannot sustain itself in a humanitarian way. People will continually be killed for what they believe and who they support. So the article continues, according to the Census Bureau, nearly 41 million people in the U.S. live in poverty. That's the second highest rate of poverty among rich countries, as measured by the percentage of people earning less than half the national median income, according to Quartz. These income and wealth disparities affect minorities the most, Black, Hispanic, and Native American children. For example, are 2 to 3 times more likely to live in poverty than white kids, according to a study using census data by Annie E. Casey Foundation. Economic inequality and racial discrimination have also been linked with civil rights abuses, particularly in Alabama and other states across the South. Furthermore, police shootings of unarmed black men and women are of deep concern to the UN. Alston, who also serves as a law professor at New York University, said in a statement announcing the start of the UN investigation that poverty in the U.S. has been overlooked for too long. Some might ask why UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights would visit a country as rich as the United States, Alston said. But despite great wealth in the U.S., there also exists great poverty and inequality. Alston also pointed out that the U.S. has been very keen on other countries being investigated by the UN for civil and human rights issues. Now it's the turn to look at what's going on in the U.S. There are pretty extreme levels of poverty in the United States given the wealth of the country, and that does not have significant human rights implications. And that does have significant human rights implications. Tires lay in the grass in front of a shuttered auto parts business on March 6, 2015 in Selma, Alabama. And it's an image of a really run-down house with a sign in front of it and tires, right? Despite these concerns, the Republican Party, which controls all three branches of the federal government, is on a course to pass a tax bill before the end of the year that will increase the federal deficit by $1 trillion in 10 years, costs that the GOP will say will be offset by reducing an already weakened social safety net. For Alston, these political decisions are at the root of systemic poverty in the U.S. The idea of human rights is that people have basic dignity and that it's the role of the government, yes, the government, to ensure that no one falls below a decent level. He said, civilized society doesn't say for people to go and make it on your own, and if you can't, bad luck. Politicians who say there's nothing I can do about that are simply wrong, Alston told WKMS 91.3 FM, a public radio station in Ohio near one of the other sites being investigated by the UN. This country is a horrible country, and people in Puerto Rico are so desperate to have a semblance of normalcy that I worry that many of these young people, right, because the first article I read detailed that many of these people are under the age of 24, that these young people, these young Puerto Ricans who grew up, who have lived on the island their whole lives, are going to reject they're going to reject their culture, and they're going to supplement it with American culture, and they're going to assimilate to this country, and they're going to have children with white people, and they're going to assimilate those children, and then those white passing children, or those white children, are going to continue the cycle and marry another white person and then become settlers on land that was stolen, that belongs to the native people of this country. But then you have these issues within the Native American, I don't want to talk too much on these issues because they're not my issues. They're not Puerto Rican, independence issues. They are Native American, indigenous native people of the United States issues. But with that being said, last episode I put in a clip from the New York Times of Native Americans talking about race, and how one of the women who was interviewed was describing the blood quantum, and how Native people in this country, their blood quantum is tested, so they, depending on how much level of indigenous blood you have in you, you get to claim you are indigenous, and you get Native people's rights, and you have land rights, and you can live on a reservation and things of that nature. But with all that being said, she was saying that her sisters didn't have enough blood quantum to qualify for those rights. So she was saying, is their pinkies not indigenous enough? Are they not indigenous enough? I'll include the link in the show notes, but it's in last episode, in episode 6. Or was it episode 7? I don't know. But last episode for sure. I'd had that clip in there. And, it's shocking. It's not shocking. It's, what's the word I'm looking for? This is what white supremacy does. It upholds these ideas and what people should and should not look like, and you should and should not be this, and you shouldn't, and you can't be black, and you can't be with a black person, and you can't be with a brown person. And my parents would constantly discourage me from dating Latinx people unless they were white passing, because I don't know, they're just anti-black, they're racist, they're not good people. I don't know how else to say it. We have a lot of anti-blackness in white Latinx communities. Absolutely. And then we have a lot of fetishizing of dark-skinned people in our culture too. It's in our merengue, it's in our salsa music, in las líricas. There are these archetypes like the Jezebel, and darker skinned people are sex crazed maniacs. Like, there are these crazy stereotypes that we have in the Latinx community that are detrimental to the well-being of other people and also uphold patriarchy. But, anyway. There's 2 more articles I'm going to read, and then I'll wrap up this episode. These last 2 articles are going to be about mental health. There was an article that came out in Newsweek about how, and I'll link it down below. And because I got to dedicate a whole episode to the mental health crisis in Puerto Rico. I cannot do it justice simply by, I'm so sorry. I'm so behind on editing the podcast and producing content. But it's honestly because I've just had a lot of personal things I've been dealing with, moving into a new place, like I've said repeatedly, working anywhere from 40 to 50 plus hours a week just to make ends meet, just to get ahead, right? I had to pay $1,400 for my deposit, the first month's rent, and the prorated rent I had for the end of February to March. So I'm broke. And then I gave $500 to my cousin when he went to Puerto Rico. Like, I'm broke. Like, I have to work. I have to do what I gotta do to survive. I gotta pay bills. I gotta pay, for now, we're making like child support arrangements. Like, I'm giving my ex-husband money, so for my son's daycare and our shared cell phone plan. And we communicate really well. Like, we talk like we're friends. Like, we have friendly conversations. We have dinner together once or twice a week, with our son. We don't yell. We don't fight. And like before, when we were at home living together, we used to fight all of the time. Like, we would yell, and it was just not, like, I did not want my son to grow up in an environment, like, it wasn't as bad as what I went through growing up. Like, we weren't yelling and screaming and throwing and breaking plates or anything, but it would just be like little things. Like, we would just fight because like one of us wasn't doing enough, and then the other one felt like this, and like, it was just like, we don't work well together. We're too codependent on each other emotionally and mentally. And the reason why was because we weren't communicating, and neither of us, we don't know how to communicate with each other, because at the end of the day, we just don't belong together. There will always be that, in a romantic way, we just are never going to fit. That's what happened to our marriage. So now we're going to talk about mental health. So alternate. Personal health. It will take a political revolution to cure the epidemic of depression. What causes depression and anxiety? I have been practicing, and this is written by Michael Bader. I hope I said that right. What causes depression and anxiety? I have been practicing I have been a practicing psychologist and psychoanalyst for almost 40 years and have seen hundreds of patients suffering from both. In my experience, some factors are obvious. People who suffer from depression and anxiety have experienced stresses and traumas in their development that predispose them to mood disorders. Garden variety psychodynamic theory teaches us that issues involving loss, neglect, guilt, and rejection usually figure predominantly in the backgrounds of people who present with significant symptoms of depression and anxiety. In addition, over 50 years of research into the neurobiology of mood disorders strongly suggests that genetic and biological factors usually accompany, if not underlie, these painful affective states. As a result of these assumptions, the treatment of depression today usually relies heavily on pharmacology and drug companies that have spent billions making sure this explanation is widely accepted. Some 1 in 5 U.S. adults is taking at least one drug for a psychiatric problem. Nearly 1 in 4 middle-aged women in the United States is taking antidepressants at any given time, and around 1 in 10 boys at American high schools are being given powerful stimulants to make them focus. Since it's well known that psychological events produce biological changes, it remains debatable whether or not disorders of our biochemistry are causes or effects. What we do know is that untold amounts of money have been spent by the pharmaceutical industry to finance research and public relations designed to enshrine biochemistry and pharmacology as primary in the diagnosis and treatment of depression and anxiety. However, what of the social, cultural, or even political contexts that contribute to emotional suffering? We owe writer and journalist Johann Hari a great debt for illuminating these broader contextual factors in his new book, Lost Connections, Uncovering the Real Causes of Depression and Unexpected Solutions. Hari first debunks the received wisdom that assumes the jury is in regarding the neurochemical basis of depression and the efficacy of antidepressants. He points to research based on unpublished studies done by pharmaceutical companies on the efficacy of antidepressants that almost unintentionally reveal a profound placebo effect underlining clinical improvements reported. When depressed people who are being studied feel cared for by psychiatric and researchers, they improve at astoundingly high rates, sometimes by as much as 40%. Thus, the pure biochemical antidepressant effect of these medications is much smaller than has been commonly assumed. In addition, when patients do get better, a commonly seen phenomenon, within a year, at least half of them are again clinically depressed. We have to acknowledge that some real people get better in real ways on antidepressants. However, it is also true that these benefits are less than advertised and results often diminish over time. Locating the cause of depression entirely in the brain and advocating a primarily pharmacological approach to its treatment is a paradigm with limited efficacy. Hari argues that depression and anxiety should be considered two sides of the same coin. He asserts that everything that causes an increase in depression also causes an increase in anxiety. The other way around. He points out that these two types of distress rise and fall together. Again, this aligns with my own clinical experience treating patients with depression and anxiety. It's rare to see one without the other. Most of Lost Connections presents the author's account of research done on the social and cultural causes of depression. For example, in the 1970s, British researchers George Brown and Terrell Harris and their team extensively interviewed 115 women living in a working-class suburb of London who were diagnosed with depression and compared their responses to a second group of 344 so-called normal, that is, not depressed, women from the same income group. Their findings were stunning at the time. The depressed women were 3 times more likely to have experienced certain major life stressors in the year prior to their diagnosis than the non-depressed women. The depressed women had more stressors, more trauma, and fewer factors thought to provide psychological resilience, such as close friends and supportive extended family, none of which I have. Well, I mean, I have supportive extended family, but they live in Puerto Rico where there's a huge giant mental health crisis because of the neglect of services and amenities that are completely normal, like, I don't know, electricity and running water, but that's a whole nother thing. This actually reminds me of a YouTube video that I've watched about childhood trauma. So this is a clip from how childhood trauma, the name of the clip is How Childhood Trauma Can Make You a Sick Adult, and it's from The Big Think.
What we found in the ACE study involving 17,500 middle-class adults was that life...
This is the description box in the YouTube, underneath the YouTube video. Big Think and the Mental Health Channel are proud to launch Big Thinkers on Mental Health, a new series dedicated to open discussions of anxiety, depression, and many other psychological disorders that affect millions worldwide. The Adverse Childhood Study found that survivors of childhood trauma are up to 5,000% more likely to attempt suicide, have eating disorders, or become IV drug users. Dr. Vincent Felitti, the study's founder, details this remarkable and powerful connection.
What we found in the ACE study involving 17,500 middle-class adults was that life experiences in childhood that are lost in time and then further protected by shame and by secrecy and by social taboos against inquiry into certain realms of human experience, that those life experiences play out powerfully and proportionately a half-century later in terms of emotional state, in terms of biomedical disease, in terms of life expectancy. In 1985, I first became interested in developmental life experiences in early childhood, really by accident. In the major obesity program we were running, a young woman came into the program. She was 28 years old and weighed 408 pounds. Asked us if we could help her with her problem, and in 51 weeks took her from 408 to 132. And thought, well, my God, we've got this problem licked. This is going to be a world-famous department here. She maintained her weight at 132 for several weeks, and then in one 3-week period regained 37 pounds in 3 weeks, which I had not previously conceived as being physiologically possible. That was triggered by being sexually propositioned at work by a much older man, as she described him. And in short order, she was back over 400 pounds faster than she had lost the weight. I remember asking her why the extreme response, after initially claiming not to have any understanding of why the extreme response. Ultimately, she told me of a lengthy incest history with her grandfather from age 10 to age 21. Ultimately, it turned out that 55% of the people in our obesity program acknowledged a history of childhood sexual abuse. I mean, that obviously is not the only issue going on, but it was where we began. And as we went down that trail, then we discovered other forms of abuse, also growing up in massively dysfunctional households, etc. And the ACE study was really designed to see whether these things existed at all in a general population, and if so, how did they play out over time. We studied 10 categories of adverse life experience that were chosen because of their prevalence in the WAIT program: childhood sexual abuse, heavy-duty childhood physical abuse, I'm not talking spanking, major emotional abuse, recurrent humiliation, 2 categories of neglect, growing up in a home where one of the members of the household was chronically depressed, suicidal, mentally ill, or in the state hospital, growing up in a home without both biological parents, growing up in a home where one of the members of your household was alcoholic or a drug user, growing up in a home where mother was beaten, growing up in a home where one of the members of your household was imprisoned during your childhood or adolescence. Those were the 10 categories. In a middle-class population, 1 in 11 people has experienced 6 or more of those adverse life experiences in childhood. So this is very common, totally unrecognized. It was difficult for us to accept their commonness, but on the other hand, these are issues that most people never touch, and so who would know without routinely asking? But at a so-called ACE score 6, experiencing any 6 of the 10 categories that we studied, that person was 4,600% more likely to become an IV drug user than a person who had experienced none of those 10 categories. Okay? Now, you think, you read in the newspaper the latest cancer scare of the week, prostate cancer or breast cancer increases 30% and everyone goes nuts. I'm talking 4,600% increase. The same ACE score of 6 produces a likelihood of attempting suicide that is between 3,100 and 5,000% greater than the likelihood of suicide attempts in someone with none of those life experiences. So the power of this relationship is enormous. So ultimately the question arises, how do life experiences in childhood end up with disease states a half century later? There are at least 2 big categories to account for that. One is through the use of various coping devices. One smokes to feel better, one overeats to feel better, one drinks to relax, etc. And those things carried out in heavy amounts have major destructive patterns, even though they may be immediately beneficial. The other broad category has to do with the effect of chronic major unrelieved stress on the workings of one's brain and central nervous system. In recent years, and this is relatively new, it's become clear that chronic major unrelieved stress can produce the release of pro-inflammatory chemicals in a person's body and also can suppress immune system function. Of the 10 categories that we studied, any 6 of them produces a shortening in life expectancy of almost 20 years. The magnitude of this problem is so huge, and the complexity of dealing with it after the fact is so huge, that realistically the only serious approach is going to have to involve primary prevention. No one knows how to do that, but it's the right question to focus on.
All right. So, what's crazy is I went through more than 6 of those categories, and I experience eating disorders. I've had issues with eating disorders, especially as a teenager, and I have PTSD, which is depression and anxiety all in one. And I have tried to commit suicide multiple times. And I remember watching this video a couple years ago, and I was like, dang, that's spot on. That is spot on. Now, I do disagree about the nuclear family. I do think that co-parenting is incredibly important. I don't think that having both your biological parents in your life is incredibly important. I do think that there is societal violence around this idea that if you're not a part of a nuclear family, then you never really had a family and you don't deserve a family, right? There are plenty of children in the foster care system that suffer at the hands of their caregivers. But at the same time, I think that if society within itself actually took care of its community and it actually took care of its people as individuals as well as a collective of human existence, that the need for a nuclear family and the society depending on the family will cease. I think that it takes a village to raise a child, and that village should not only be the people who live in the four walls that you go home to every night after you work your butt off all day. I hope that I'm coming across as very clear. I don't see anything wrong with the traditional family if that's what you want for yourself, but I do find that the traditional family in the American sense, where it's just a mom and a dad and kids, is very isolating, and it's like a totalitarian capitalist 1984 setup of what society should be, when the actuality is there's millions of us and we're all human beings. We don't live in a post-racial world, but if we did, then we would all agree that since we're all human beings, we should just all take care of each other, and we should all take care of each other in the way that we deserve to be taken care of. And that includes biological connections that we have with ourselves and with other people, and studying those connections and figuring out how to heal not only the physical but the mental and the emotional parts of us and of ourselves. So I want to go back to the alternate article because it's really fascinating. So the notion that trauma and stressful life experience cause depression and anxiety is really no longer controversial. In the mid-1990s, Vincent Felitti of the Kaiser Hospital in San Diego conducted an extraordinary and simple study called the Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACE study. And this is that's awesome. Actually, that's the guy who just spoke. He sent out a questionnaire to, that was the guy, Dr. Vincent Felitti from the clip. He sent out a questionnaire to 17,000 people who were seeking health care from Kaiser, asking people to check off which of 10 different categories of childhood trauma they had experienced. These traumas included most of the terrible things that can happen to you when you're a child, including various types of sexual, physical, or emotional abuse. In addition, respondents filled out a detailed medical questionnaire testing for all sorts of things that could be problematic, such as obesity, addiction, or depression. The results stunned even Dr. Felitti. For every category of traumatic experience someone went through as a child, that person was radically more likely to become depressed as an adult. The correlation was almost perfect to the greater the trauma, the greater the risk for depression, anxiety, or suicide. For example, if you had 6 categories of traumatic events in your childhood, you were 5 times more likely to become depressed as an adult than someone who didn't have any. If you have 7 types of traumatic events as a child, you were 3,100% more likely to attempt suicide as an adult. Yeah. The notion that depression isn't a disease but a normal response to abnormal life experiences wouldn't surprise most of us, except for the fact that we live in a culture which pathologizes psychic suffering as a disorder within individuals rather than a suffering that makes sense given a pathological environment. The cost of such victim blaming is high. If you believe depression is slowly a result of disordered brain chemistry, you don't have to think about your life and about what other people may have done to you. It's painful to think along these lines, which may be one of the reasons why a biological explanation is often easier. As Hari says, quoting Dr. Robert Anda, who worked at the ACE study, when people have these kinds of problems, it's time to stop asking what's wrong with them and time to start asking what happened to them. Hari believes that the social and cultural causes of depression all involve some form of disconnection. He argues that people in our culture are disconnected from meaningful work, citing as evidence a huge Gallup poll about work conducted in 2011 and 2012 that included millions of workers across 142 countries. Gallup found that only 13% of people described themselves as engaged in their jobs, meaning that they were enthusiastic about and committed to their work and pleased with their contribution to their organization. 63% reported themselves not engaged, and 24% described themselves as actively not engaged, which in this survey meant they acted out their unhappiness, undermining their co-workers, and even seeking to damage the companies where they worked. Nearly twice as many people hate their jobs as love their jobs. The prevalence of deadening, routinized, and alienated work leads people to feel unappreciated, unrecognized, and frustrated, with little or no sense of contributing to something bigger and better than themselves. Disempowerment and indifferent hierarchies at work cause depression. Hari explores another form of disconnection that is more obvious, namely being disconnected from other people. Social isolation and loneliness have been shown to have a wide range of negative physical health consequences. Feeling lonely causes our cortisol levels to soar, a hormonal outcome that causes wide-ranging damage to the body and mind. In fact, acute loneliness is seen as every bit as stressful as being physically attacked. Human beings are wired to be in groups, and when we are alone for too long, we feel alienated and insecure. Loneliness and social isolation is increasingly a public health epidemic in America. As sociologist Robert Putnam has shown, the percentage of Americans actively involved in community organizations has radically declined. From 1985 to 95, just one decade, active involvement in community organizations decreased almost 50%. We seem to have stopped banding together and have found ourselves increasingly shut away in our homes. We do things together less than any generation that came before us. And finally, we know that being alone changes our brains, and that curing that loneliness changes our brains. So if we're now looking at social as well as biological factors, we can't understand what's really going on with depression today. Hari goes on to talk about another form of disconnection, being disconnected from meaningful values. In this section, he offers a critique of our consumer culture clearly dominated by an addiction to material possessions, money, and status. He points out that advertising experts have admitted since the 1920s that their job is to make people feel inadequate and then to offer their products as the solution to the very inadequacy they have created. A capitalist economy and culture that tells us there is never enough, and that we are never enough, provides us with what Hari calls junk values. Materialism has never been associated with health and happiness. In fact, when people are asked to reflect on what really matters to them, they usually admit to such deep values as meaningful work, community, family, or being a loving person and service to others. When we are estranged from ourselves, we suffer. Hari also reviews some of the usual suspects that come in any discussion about emotional well-being, including being disconnected from status, respect, and social approval by virtue of the gross and radical imbalances of income and wealth in our society, as well as being disconnected from the natural world and animals in a society in which most people live in cities and conduct most of their lives indoors. There is such powerful scientific evidence that suggests societies with greater equality have less psychiatric illness, and that being out in nature reduces depression and anxiety. Hari wants to be clear that he is not saying genetics and neurobiology have no effect on depression. What he is saying is that the brain, and even our genes, respond to signals from the world. When scanned, the brains of London cab drivers, who have to memorize the entire map of London, reveal that the part responsible for spatial awareness is bigger than in other people's brains. Experience changes the brain. Clearly, once changes in the brain have occurred, they gain a momentum of their own and contribute to or reduce emotional distress. Genes can significantly increase our sensitivity to environmental stress, but that's a far cry from saying that they are a primary cause of depression. Hari points out that historically, depression and anxiety were regarded as more moral failures, and as a result, the notion that depression is primarily biological and can be seen as a defense against blame and judgment. However, much such a defense may help some people fend off social disapproval and private shame. The question of causation isn't answered. The importance of understanding the social and cultural conditions that seem to produce depression and anxiety is that it points the way toward interventions and social changes that could yield tremendous psychological benefits on a mass scale. Obviously, I'm a believer in psychotherapy, and I've been also repeatedly seen and in the short and medium term benefits of medications. However, to truly deal with the epidemic of depression and anxious suffering in the world, we need to consider making more radical social and political changes. Reducing inequality is not merely in the interest of justice, but would likely produce a significant decrease in depression and anxiety. Further experiments in cooperative, more democratic and egalitarian work arrangements have shown that such innovations, by reducing the alienation and estrangement people feel at work, can significantly decrease stress while not sacrificing success in the marketplace. Hari suggests we ask depressed people not what's the matter with you, but instead what matters to you. Such solutions involve making radical changes in social life. However, I think that our movement acquires a greater degree of urgency and validity if we understand how much emotional suffering can potentially be remediated. Such understanding can even inform political proposals, like those that call for universal basic income, or UBI, in which people are given a fixed amount of money every year, completely without conditions, to do whatever they wish. Something that has been tried experimentally in places all over the world. Such projects do not only directly address the problem of poverty and income inequality, but emotional health and welfare as well. The UBI gives people the freedom to live and work in ways aligned with their deeper, non-materialistic, non-junk values. They can hold out for work that is less alienated and more safely connect with their families and communities. The research into these experiments have shown that they greatly enhance the overall levels of emotional as well as physical well-being. When we privilege explanations of depression and anxiety that emphasize our internal biology, we let society off the hook. We privatize psychological pain, even as the role that our culture contributes to that pain goes unchallenged. Joanne Hari's new book helps us tell a different story, as Hari points out. It is even a story endorsed by the World Health Organization, the leading medical body in the world, which in 2011 summarized the evidence this way. Quote, mental health is produced socially. The presence or absence of mental health is above all a social indicator and therefore requires social as well as if individual solutions, unquote. In its official statement for World Health Day in 2017, the United Nations explained that the quote, dominant biomedical narrative of depression, unquote, is based on, quote, biased and selective use of research outcomes, unquote, that, quote, cause more harm than good, undermine the right to health, and must be abandoned, unquote. Because, like this author mentioned earlier, the pharmaceutical industrial complex, the corruption in Washington, because this whole country is built on lies. So you can read the rest of the article for yourself, but you get the point. You get the point. That mental health isn't just some biological result of bad genes. It's a culmination of of biological and environmental factors. The environment turns on the biological factors, and your brain changes its chemistry in reaction to the environment that it's around. Duh. So there's one more article I want to read about toxic relationships, and I'm going to go ahead and end the episode. But currently, with my family situation and the lack of support I have received from my family, I have decided to cut my family out of my life temporarily. I don't know if it's going to be a permanent thing, but it's not that I don't love my family. It's not that I don't love my mom. I don't love my dad. But I think it's essential that you cut toxic people out of your life, especially if they're going to mistreat you and they're going to continue to gaslight you. So I just want people to know who want to work with the Boricua Socialist Diaspora caucus that it's going to take years for us to build this movement, and it's going to take years for us to be heard, and we're going to have to just keep fighting and cutting through the noise with our voices and with our artwork and with whatever hippy dippy crap we decide to do, because that is what our lives are going to be, and we will have to make sacrifices, and we will have to do what we have to do to survive, and we will have to listen to people that we would rather not listen to, and we will have to fight against statehooders, and we will have to, we're just gonna have to fight. That's that. So, why it's okay to cut out toxic family members out of our life. This is written by Chelsea Jackson. It was published, I guess, in Her Campus. I'm gonna include all the links to all these articles down below. We get it. Your connection with your family is supposed to be this mythical bond that nobody and nothing can break. However, sometimes it's okay to distance yourself from certain family members, even if that means cutting them off indefinitely, which is where I'm at right now. I have cut my family off indefinitely until they can treat me with respect and kindness. I will treat them with respect, and I will treat them with accountability. I will hold them accountable for the crappy things that they have done, and the lack of understanding and the lack of support I have received over the past decades. So, I cannot let people who are toxic, and I cannot let people who gaslight me and mistreat me in my life. And I want to read this article to you because I feel like it explains how I feel in a more rational manner than me just yelling into a microphone or internally screaming and disassociating for 20 minutes. You don't want to just hear silence. So, I know I'm joking about this a little bit. I'm sorry. I know, I really went out there on the deep end, but I just think it's so funny. Cause Jimmy Dore, I may not really support him anymore, but one thing that he did say that was really true is comedy is tragedy plus time. And it's so true. Anyway, the article. You should never compromise your mental, emotional, or physical health for the sake of tolerating a toxic family member. Before you start blocking Aunt Susan and your second cousin, it's important to recognize the signs of a toxic person. They're judgmental. Constructive criticism is healthy, but persistent, unwarranted criticism can deteriorate anyone's self-esteem. They feed off drama. Have you ever turned to a family member? This is my mom right here. Have you ever turned to a family member for some personal advice, yet somehow, after you've shared your most vulnerable moments with them, someone you thought was a trusted ally, this is my dad too, by the way, somehow everyone in your family knows everything about your personal life, including your distant cousin in Hungary, who you've never met. This is what a lot of Puerto Rican parents do in the diaspora, is they'll call everyone in Puerto Rico and they'll just lie on you. They'll tell all these crazy fantasies of all the horrible things that you've done. And then they'll just compare notes about what child is the most horrible. And that's toxic AF. That really needs to stop. I don't know if that's an Americanized version of our culture or that's just legit, we're full of chismes. But that's disgusting, and it is really toxic. My personal life isn't anyone's business but mine and who I decide to share it with. And if people want to know about my personal life, I will just tell you. You don't have to go behind my back and talk crap about me. I'm a really rational, well thought out person. And, I've become who I am today because I've been gaslighted a majority of my life. I was told that the abuse that happened to me didn't happen over and over again, to the point where I over-explain things even within the podcast because I want people to know that what I'm saying is factual. Because sometimes I have a hard time believing it myself because my whole life I've been told I'm a liar, that I'm, the gaslighting. So they gaslight you. If your family member continually claims they never said something when you and everyone else knows they did, it might not seem that serious. However, this is a form of gaslighting, which is highly emotionally abusive behavior. Welcome to my world. Welcome to my world. Gaslighting is they constantly make you feel crazy by convincing you that things really didn't happen. And then they convince, like my siblings, right? My siblings are completely convinced that these things never happened to me, even though, like, my sister, right? My sister and I have a really toxic relationship. She's 7 years younger than me. My parents got divorced when she was when she was born, basically. So what does she remember? When I was 15, she was 7. Your childhood memories don't start. Their childhood amnesia, right? Your childhood memories don't really start until you're like 5 years old. So when her memories were starting to begin, I was 12 years old. And I had been through years of abuse. Like, what the hell does she remember? She doesn't remember what I remember. And plus, the way she was treated was completely the opposite way that I was treated. Like, my dad has literally called me the guinea pig child, the experimental child. The one that I got to experience all my parents' brunt force, unresolved generational trauma that they had experienced as Puerto Rican people. Like, they're the only ones that act like they don't get it. They like to pretend that nothing ever adverse happened to them and that it still doesn't affect them today. But by them pretending that what happened to them as children and what happened to them as teenagers doesn't still affect them today is ridiculously inaccurate and completely intellectually dishonest, as every article I just read to you in this episode proves my theory. Proves my point that I'm trying to make. That trauma is social. It's not just biological. And once those neurons and whatever, that brain chemistry, all that stuff that gets turned on by these traumas in your life, that it's going to affect you for the rest of your life. It's completely changed how your brain works. You can go to the gym, you can exercise, you know, and it's like, why the working poor, why poor people drink? Because they don't have enough money for antidepressants. And if you have Medicaid, and I mean, it's like, you work 3 jobs, or you're living off welfare, and you're socially isolated. I mean, there's so many layers. It's not simply just like, oh, take your pills and you'll feel better. And it's not just about taking pills either. It's society in itself and fixing what we have going on. And people don't want to do that. People like my parents, they are gusanos. They don't want to do that. They want to be U.S. citizens. They could care less about fixing society. They want to live in the framework that already exists. So the next point in the article, they only talk to you when they need something from you. Often they'll go to you for advice or emotional comfort, but once you turn to them for support, they dismiss your needs or hold your personal information against you. That's my mom. They flip-flop between positive and negative reinforcement. That's my mom and dad. They can lash out at you, yell, and insult you. However, once you ignore them after this senseless attack, they'll likely coax you back into their trap by offering you pseudo praise and support. Typically, these positive interactions are short-lived before this individual goes back to their typical manipulative behavior. Accurate. If anyone in your family displays any of these symptoms of toxic, abusive behavior, they're putting your mental health in jeopardy. Alethea Asturizaga, a licensed clinical social worker at the Alethea Psychotherapy Associates PC, explains to her campus, quote, I have worked with countless people who have lived their lives dealing with toxic family members and significant others. In fact, this is one of the chief reasons that many people seek therapy, unquote. Toxic relationships, even with family members, can drain you emotionally, which can impact your overall mental well-being. Nevertheless, you shouldn't accept this as the status quo. There are certain techniques that people can use to make these relationships more tolerable. These methods generally involve distancing yourself to a certain degree from the toxic person. However, in many cases, the best solution is to remove the toxic individual from your life completely. This is rarely easy and often complicated and emotionally conflicting in the case of close family relationships, such as with a parent. But when situations deteriorate to the point of making it impossible to live a happy and liberated life, this course of action is usually the best. Asturizaga says, This abusive behavior isn't confined to romantic relationships because anyone can have a toxic influence in your life. Shannon Battle, LPC LCAS, for the last 8 years at Family Services of America, tells her campus that the best way to approach a toxic person is to first establish boundaries. I've tried that. For me, that's not what's going to work. For me, it's just going to be cutting them off. I cannot have toxic people in my life, especially people who are literally crazy and cannot see a flaw within what they have done and will convince other people with their manipulation complete and utter lies. It's disgusting. It's disgusting what they have done and the way they have chosen to conduct themselves. And the way they have gaslighted me for so long. Like, I refuse. Like, I'm not gonna let you do that anymore. I'm the rational one. Yeah, I got angry. Yeah, I cussed people out. Yeah, I've said my piece. I've done what I've done. I may not have handled it 100% the best way possible 100% of the time. But at the end of the day, I'm a human being with limits. And when you've been gaslighted for decades, there comes a point in your life where it's time to start fighting back. And if you don't want to if you can't handle the heat in the kitchen, then stop trying to dish out things that you don't even understand. Stop trying to talk about things you don't understand. Stop trying to create movements. Stop trying. You have to really understand who you are as a person first before you try to go fix the world. And the thing is, when you're young, you think you know things and you think you understand things that you really don't. Like right now, like 10 years from now, I may look back on this podcast and be like, dang, that was ridiculous. I can't believe I said that. But that's the thing about personal growth, is that you're always evolving. So the article continues. I'm going to skip ahead. Even after you distance yourself from that toxic person, it will still take time to recover from that abuse. And that's okay too. Family is a subjective term, so you can form a new family from your supportive friends. Surrounding yourself with supportive people will help you reinforce the positive change that you need in your life. While my personal experience with toxic parents might seem like an isolated event, it isn't. Lori Osashay, MSS LCSW, and a director and owner of the Body Image Counseling Center, explains to her campus, quote, often one of these toxic family members is a parent. It is extremely painful to realize that a toxic parent's personality is very unlikely to ever change. The decision to go low or no contact and then stick with one's decision can be excruciating. On top of that, my clients often do not realize the parent's behavior is toxic, so they continue to put up with abusive behaviors, unquote. It can be a never-ending cycle of abusive behavior until you accept that this behavior is, in fact, harmful, and that it won't change until you distance yourself from this family member. Quote, the social stigma of needing to honor thy mother and father is another stumbling block. Sometimes cutting a parent out of your life is the best decision, but you need enormous support and education to do it successfully and experience relief, unquote, Ashe says. As someone who's perfected the art of cutting toxic lovers, friends, and family out of her life, the toxic person in your life might try to gaslight you into thinking that you're actually the abuser. They will likely claim that you've been victimized because you're avoiding them, just because they give you the false sense of change or because they've made you feel remorse. These are the same abusive tactics they've used before, and you shouldn't backpedal and accept them back into your life. After all, toxicity is nauseous, and you don't need that kind of behavior killing your mental health. So I encourage you to cut out toxic people in your life, and I encourage you to evaluate the purposes of the relationships around you, and I encourage you to question society in the way that it has been structured by white supremacy, especially in the United States, and how we already live in a totalitarian fascist regime that you go to work, you go home. Just like all these Puerto Rican people that I miss meeting in the mainland, that they miss that about back home, that there's community back home. Here, there isn't. You have to build it. And you have to gain trust from people that will not trust you because of capitalism, because of the way the system is in place. You get yours and you just survive. And that's what it is when you are poor in the United States. And I think that about sums up this whole entire episode, and it wraps it up with a nice little bow there. So this is the end of episode 7, and I hope you guys have a great week. I'm really hoping I can produce more content and I can catch up on all these episodes that I kind of let down to the wayside. I have a lot of episodes I need to plan. I'm hoping to get all these stuff edited, and anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful evening, day, morning, whenever you're listening to this podcast, wherever you're at. And, buenas noches.